Deep in the forests of North America, a creature is said to exist. A creature that people are encountering.
Seriously, look how big it is.
With far too many reports to ignore, there are elements of truth behind these accounts that mankind can no longer
It's
ignore.
created almost this obsession where I need to find out
Could the
more.
breeding population of large, upright, hairy hominids really exist in North America? Or is there something more paranormal at work here, deep in the woods? If just one footprint, one wood knock, or one howl was real, then man's understanding of primate evolution would be changed forever. Join Glenn Purcell and the Catskill Appalachian Research Collective as they delve further into the mysteries of Bigfoot and other paranormal phenomena through the eyes of witnesses, investigators, critics, and skeptics. Join us as we look to discover what lurks from behind tall trees.
Hello, everybody. We have a pretty special night going on tonight. I have my pain in the ass brother, Bill Rigby, who wanted to join tonight as my co-host. So I'll bring him on because he's a pain in my ass. And then
I ain't gonna say what I usually say. I'll be nice.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
Do that because I can take you out. I mean, multiple ways, but that's okay. But it's a pretty special night for me because I have my guest tonight. I literally feel like he is my brother. And if Bill, if you don't shut that damn phone off, I'm going to kick your ass.
That wasn't mine, was it?
No, I don't know. He is literally like my Bigfoot brother. We really got to know each other over in the UK last year. And I think the world of him. And I'm so happy he said yes when I said, could you please come on my little show? And so welcome everybody, Brian King Sharp, who I'm going to trade places with here. There you go. Hi.
I'm so big on the screens.
Nobody wants to see me big. It's just, you know.
You're the big man, Brian.
You're much more
Come on.
handsome. Yeah. Much more handsome.
I am a legend in my own mind. That's for sure.
Oh, no. I think you're a legend.
Oh, man, you stole my line.
Yeah. Bill, you are only a legend in your own mind.
That's right. And I had the shirt to prove.
So, Brian, you've been pretty busy lately, my man.
Always something going on. Today, I was really busy. This is my favorite thing I've done all week. Guess what I got today?
What did you get today?
I got new chickens. I have been trying to get new chicks to replace our flock that was decimated by the predators. We won't get into that. That's a sad story. But yeah, I got 12 new baby chicks today, so I'm really excited about that. I'm happy. I can see them out the window right now. I'm looking down at the chicken coop. So all is well on the here at the Bigfoot bungalow with the brand new chicks today. So yeah, I'm stoked.
I love it.
And I get to hang out with you guys. That's just an added bonus for the amazing day that I've had.
Well, I mean, the hanging out with me is an added bonus, not so much Bill.
Now, wait a minute. I was going to say the added bonus was the 12 chicks.
Well, absolutely. And I'm definitely going to come see these babies.
There you go.
Because I have chickens and we're not getting any new ones this year because, let's face it, we travel a lot.
Yeah, there is that. But we always have somebody here. Anytime we travel, like over to the UK, I'll be over there with you again.
Yes.
At the end of May to do the Cryptid Conference UK. But we have a house sitter that comes and takes care of our dogs and takes care of the animals and takes care of the 40 acres here. So we're very fortunate to have that. But yeah, it is a responsibility. I mean, I'm looking at getting a new African gray parrot, and that's one of those big responsibilities that we're really having to weigh around here at the Bigfoot bungalow. But see how that works out over the next couple of weeks.
An African parrot?
Yeah, I'm a bird person. I've had birds in the past. I've had an orange wing Amazon parrot back in the day. I've had some cockatoos, all kinds of birds. So I'm kind of a weird bird person. I haven't had one in a ton of years. So yeah, I found somebody locally here about an hour away in North Carolina that has a baby for sale. And I'm really thinking about making the trip and getting it tomorrow. So
hopefully I won't get divorced. African one, isn't that the total gray? That they're total gray.
Yeah, they're totally gray, and then they have a little red, usually on the tail feathers.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, that's what I thought.
yeah, they're some of the smartest birds on Earth. Yeah,
Yes.
they're definitely smart.
I'm trying to type Odyssey and I can't. Never mind. It's right in front of me.
ODYSSE.
For all of you at home, I can't spell for shit, so
She needs spell check constantly.
I do, but that's,
Gwen, we're live, but I have to tell you, you'll appreciate this.
Yeah.
Danny just slid the door open to the studio and said, "You didn't buy a bird today while I was gone, did you?"
Oh, was he listening in?
He knows about the 12 baby chicks, but he's not so keen on the African gray. So we've got to work that out. We'll do that.
Uh-oh.
You're welcome, Danny.
I knew Gwen would appreciate that more than
That's hysterical. Yeah, that's hysterical because that's me. I'm the one who's like, "We're getting 2 dogs," and he's like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we're getting 2 dogs," And we
he's
just
like live on Facebook and YouTube. I don't care. I'm going to ask the question: did you buy a bird today? I know better.
Mike would send me 20,000 messages, and I just ignore them until the show's over. So
The thing is that you got busted.
Yeah, totally.
Well,
Our house is a 400 square foot tiny house, so there's not a whole lot I can say or do that doesn't make it through the walls. So there's no privacy here whatsoever. The door is closed, but it doesn't.
Man. So, what have you got new going on besides chickens and birds that you're not supposed to have?
And hot water.
Well, there's always things that are going on. I tell you what's been going on with me recently. It's kind of weird. I've been going down this rabbit hole of Bigfoot, but in a different way. I went out a couple of weeks ago at this point. I guess it was a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. I was out at Ron Moorhead's house. Ron is about a little over 4 hours away from me in North Carolina. He's up towards the coast. I'm more in the Piedmont area in the foothills. So, we have another podcast. Obviously, Sasquatch Odyssey is our flagship podcast for me and Paranormal World Productions, but we have other podcasts. I host That Bigfoot podcast with Wayne. It's a co-hosted show. I also do Backwoods Bigfoot Stories, which is a completely storytelling show, me narrating stories. And then we have a true crime podcast that Danny and I are launching here probably at the end of the month together called The Guilty. So we have the Guilty Files, true crime. We have the Bigfoot shows. And Wayne and I were talking about over on That Bigfoot podcast. We have talked about back and forth about the Sierra Sounds. I have always had some questions about the Sierra Sounds and their authenticity, particularly to do with a couple of things. The footprints, for example, that were found in conjunction with these sounds that were recorded, and then the recordings themselves. I am a content creator by trade. That's my full-time job. I create content. I do podcasts for a living. So I work very intricately with sound.
Yes.
So when these Sierra sounds are out there, I can tell some things seem closer to mics than others. Things seem farther away than others. And I've always been really confused about that because I don't think anybody's ever narrowed that down with Ron as far as the setup. It's basically we threw some mics out. We got these sounds and they were analyzed by a crypto linguist, Scott Nelson. We got Dr. Curlin taking a look at these things and saying there's no 50-second hum, there's no this, that, or the other. But nobody's ever asked a lot of these questions that have been burning in my mind. And I love Ron. Don't get me wrong. I've met Ron tons of times. I've had him on the show a ton of times. So Wayne and I were doing this podcast over on That Bigfoot podcast, talking about the Sierra Sounds in particular. And some of these questions. And I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I know there's these unreleased tapes. Like Jeff over at Pine Island Research, I think it was last year, he had Todd Neese and he had Ron Moorhead on at the same time. And Todd sort of spilled the beans. Todd spilled the beans in this way that was very nonchalant, which is, if you know Todd, it's kind of how he is. He's like, hey, man, you remember that time me and you and Peter Byrne were hanging out in the late 90s and you brought this shoebox full of all the Sierra tapes that you haven't released?
Oh,
And I'm like, what? Hold on. You know, we've
you
got
mean
this.
there's more?
Right. There's more. We've got this 90 minutes or so that they've produced that have been out there for decades and decades. But he's probably got another 10 or 12 hours of this stuff that nobody's ever heard.
Oh my
So I was
gosh.
very interested in that. So Wayne and I were doing the show, and he's asking me these questions, and I'm like, I don't know. You know, I've had Ron on a couple of times. I never asked him those questions because I didn't know that he had these other sounds.
Right.
I was like, you know what? I'm just going to send him a text message. So I sent Ron a text message and said, hey, are you ever going to release these other 10 or 12 hours that you have? And he's like, well, no, I don't plan on it, because the best of what's out there is the best of what we have. So he kind of felt like everything was sort of redundant, and they, you know, multiple people, like it wasn't just Ron that was recording this. It was Ron, it was Al Berry, it was some of the other hunters that were there.
Right.
Probably 5 different individuals that had their own recording stuff that was recording these sounds simultaneously. Over the course of the years, Ron's house caught on fire. He lost a lot of his master copies of his tape, but he had the Al Berry tapes. He had some of these other tapes that were from these other guys that he was able to put this compilation together. And it's pretty much what we see that's out there now. If you've got the CDs, I think they're about 90 minutes. You can go to YouTube right now and type in the Sierra Sounds. You're going to get about 4.5 minutes of what is it's like the highlights of the Sierra Sounds. But I sent Ron this text message and said, are you planning on releasing these? He said, no. And I said, well, would you be open to me driving up to your house and us doing an in-person interview, and us maybe pulling some of those out and playing some of these unreleased tapes?
Yeah.
And to my surprise, Ron was like, that'd be great. I'm free over the next couple of weeks. When do you want to do it? So we set it up. I drove up there. Fortunately, we have a beach house in the area where Ron is. So I drove up to the beach house. I stayed there for a couple of days and went over to his house and sat down for a couple of hours and just had a phenomenal conversation. It aired Sasquatch Odyssey, I guess it was last Friday or so.
Yeah.
So it's out there. It's the Sierra Sounds, the unreleased tapes. And I play about 7 or 8 minutes of what I have at this point, because there's hours and hours of this stuff. I probably have another 30, 35 minutes or so of stuff that I haven't gone through yet that Ron gave me. So it's out there and people have been responding to it. It's been crazy because it's one of these things that if you've only heard these bits and pieces and now you're getting something that you haven't heard before. And I immediately could tell the difference in some of the sounds because it's unmastered. It's raw audio that you're getting for the first time.
Right.
You're hearing them talk. You're hearing these other guys talk to these creatures. And then you get the creatures. And I heard some things in there that really stuck out to me that were different than anything we'd heard before. So the thing is Ron is working with, I don't know if you guys are familiar with The Flash of Beauty, the documentary that came out. So Brett and Jill, the masterminds behind that, have been working with Ron for a couple of years now to do a documentary. It's basically, and I don't know, I don't want to overstep my bounds here. I'm going to say it's very Voices of the Wilderness-esque, which is Ron's first book.
Okay.
It's about the Sierra Sounds. It's about how they were captured. It's about the unreleased sounds that he still has. So they're going to compile a ton of these, and it's going to be in this documentary. So I'm thinking the documentary will probably be out. I mean, I'm guessing sometime in the next year or so. So we had to be very careful. Ron is 83 years old.
Yes.
He's up there. He's not aging in reverse like none of us are.
No.
He was very concerned that anything I did or we did on the podcast was going to interfere with the work that they were doing. So I reached out to Jill and Brett and said, here's what Ron and I are doing. I want to play some of these tapes. And they were perfectly fine, obviously, with everything that we did and everything I released. So there was no conflict there, but I'm excited and I'm stoked that somebody is taking the time to do this kind of a documentary and do this deep dive into the Sierra camp.
Absolutely.
And on there, because there are some concerns, and those are some of the lingering questions I had. There's some lingering questions that people who listened to my show had, was about the footprints. You know, Dr. Grover Krantz was very outspoken about what he felt about those prints. He didn't think they were real. And Jeff Meldrum has had a very strong stance on those Sierra Camp examples of footprints as well. And he had some concerns about the spontaneity, as he puts it, of these footprints. So I asked Ron some of those questions. So Ron talks about that. The other big thing I think that really came out of the interview, because I told Ron going in, I wanted to get deeper.
Yes.
I want to be respectful, obviously, of his weight in this community, but I also want to get deeper into what happened there. So I asked him some of those questions about the footprints. I asked him some of the questions about the setup of how they got the sounds that they got. And I was very candid with him about the fact that Meldrum and Krantz have come out and questioned the footprints. And Ron's like, they are what they are. We can't change that. I wouldn't expect them to say anything different because of their scientific paradigm. They're trained in this materialistic scientific paradigm, and they compare those things to what they believe to be real, which is, to Meldrum and Krantz, would be the Patterson-Gimlin patty prints. And if there's anything outside of that, they really don't know what box to check. So it ends up in another box somewhere as fake or not real, or whatever the verbiage that you want to use there. So, I was very candid with Ron about that. And one of the big questions that came out from a lot of my listeners, and one of the, frankly, questions that I had, was Scott Nelson, Dr. Curlin and those folks took a look at those, but they did limited tests. There were just certain tests to see if they were in range or out of range for human beings. And let's be honest, some of the sounds can be replicated. There's a guy on YouTube, I've done shows about this in the past, that does a pretty damn good job of replicating certain sections of this. Almost to a T. But there are certain parts of it that seem to be outside of a human range. So that's kind of where Curlin and his thing was back in the day. But Scott Nelson is really the person that has gotten the brunt of the tapes and been able to say, he's come out quite frankly and said, he did it on my show. He told me this is a language and this is why. These morpheme strings, these things that I've picked out of this as a trained crypto linguist, this is a language. So that was one of those questions that was sort of lingering in my mind. So I asked Ron point blank, I said, the question has been for so many years, if Scott has discovered this, and he has this training, knowledge, and experience to be able to put this out there as fact,
right?
Why hasn't he presented it in a way where it can be peer reviewed? I think that's a fair question.
That is a fair question. Yep.
And I think you'd be surprised to hear what Ron had to say. And if you listen to the episode over on Sasquatch Odyssey, you can hear the answer to that, because he gives a very definitive answer that I don't think we're going to have to wait much longer to see that happen. So
awesome.
There's a lot there. The unreleased sounds, just that in and of itself, the 7 or 8 minutes that I played during that interview was mind-blowing for me, because I felt this sense of awe of hearing something that most people haven't heard before.
Right.
And it's raw.
That'd be impressive.
Yeah, it's in its raw form. So I was stoked to be able to hear that. And I picked out some things that were really strange to me, some things that sound anomalous that I'm going to dig a little deeper on. And I did have a conversation when I was at Ron's house that once this documentary is done, those other 10, 12 hours, whatever he has, I'm going to work with him to help him categorize that and go through that and to clean it up to a point where he may be comfortable at some point releasing it, or at least releasing a little bit more of it. So he just needs help. Honestly, he doesn't have time to do that kind of stuff. And I work with audio every day, so I have the ability to go through that very quickly. So I'm stoked that he would even consider to allow me to do that. So I'm very, very much looking forward to that once this documentary's out.
Okay, Brian, one question here though. With the little bit that you listened to, on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the greatest, I'm keeping the scale short. How good are they?
Well, I think good is a very subjective term. To me, it's different. And as long as it's something different than what we've heard before, to me, that's good, because it's something that It's just not repeating itself, right?
Right.
So I'll give you an example of, and it may be something completely benign, but there's something that I heard, and I can't even tell you exactly where it was in the audio that I put out, but it's out there on the audio on Sasquatch Odyssey if you guys want to listen to it, to see if you pick it up yourself. It sounded anomalous to me. And by anomalous, I mean artificial. This is, for lack of a better term, it almost sounded like one of those. You ever seen those slide whistle, like the kind of toys?
Yeah.
That's what I picked up in one just really quick sequence of one of these sounds. Is there something to that? I don't know. But to me, that's an anomaly that needs to be further looked at.
Right.
I haven't had a chance to do it. So those are just that one thing. If so many people are listening to this now, that they're out there in the zeitgeist, my show gets a few downloads here and there, so there's going to be quite a few ears listening to this. There's going to be people that pick out things that maybe I even missed. So I think that's very important for people to be able to do. So getting those other 10 or 12 hours that Ron is sitting on, potentially to the point where they can be ready for prime time and to be released, just to have other people listen to, and maybe even take it a step further and having somebody else, some other scientist, some other audio expert, somebody out there that's willing to take a look at it to sort of get a second opinion, right? Scott Nelson is really the only opinion we've ever heard from. And frankly, cryptolinguist is more of an art form, in my opinion, than a science. I'm just going to put that out there. Yeah. And Ron made it very clear during the interview that he hasn't, anybody can study these sounds. They're out there for everybody. He has no problem with people looking at them. He was very specific about that in the interview. But he wants to make sure that you're a credible person and that you do have some sort of qualification if you're going to make a opinion that you're going to then put forth in public. You need to have something. There's got to be something there that sort of qualifies you for that. And no other crypto linguists have ever come forward that wanted to take a look at them. I don't know what the other experts would be, frankly, that would even look at them, but I'm sure there's plenty of things that could be done with sound. So I'm just sort of trying to be the pickle in the middle here to maybe move that forward, because I do think it's a very, very important piece of the puzzle when it comes to Bigfoot phenomenon. Because when you think about Bigfoot, you think about the Patterson-Gimlin film. Most people would think about the Freeman footage, particularly the second video, not necessarily the first video. And then you have the Sierra sounds. Sometimes that may be flipped on its head, and it may be number one with the Sierra sounds for some people. So I think it's a very, very key piece of the evidence that we need to have as much access as possible to take a look at. And again, Ron's not getting any younger. None of us are getting younger. So the quicker we can maybe get that in the zeitgeist for folks to take a look at, I think, in my opinion, the better.
Now, I'm glad you brought up this interview, because the one thing I wanted to ask you, and I've met Ron at various events that we have both been at, and I think he's a wonderful person. He's a very sweet man. His wife is amazing. And I have his books, which I've read. I've had them for several years now. It's one of the first books I bought when Bigfoot stepped into my life. And I've heard the Sierra sounds. I actually listened to them at the Georgia Bigfoot Museum down there. He has earphones you can put on and listen to the Sierra sounds. I did hear them down there. And I'm curious, because there's a lot of people that do not agree with Ron's position on what Bigfoot is or isn't. And I'm curious to know, based on talking to him and hearing all of these sounds that he's recorded and hearing his stories from his mouth in his living room, has your opinion, how has his story and what he thinks and what you heard and saw changed how you view Bigfoot?
I think it's changed me a lot in many ways. And it's not just the interactions with Ron and what he feels about Bigfoot. Ron catches a lot of crap in the Bigfoot community because of his stance on quantum physics.
Yep.
He wrote the Quantum Bigfoot, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's his first book. Well, his second book. So here's the thing I want to say about that. And I really took this away after sitting in his living room and having this conversation with him, both on the air and off the air. Ron has never claimed to be a physicist.
Right.
He's never claimed to completely understand quantum physics. He is simply taking a look at something that most people don't understand and saying, I think a lot of the answers that we're looking at lie outside of Newtonian physics and possibly in quantum physics. It explains a lot.
It does explain a lot.
Even though you may not be able to explain the quantum physics behind what we're explaining, it would explain these abilities that some of these creatures apparently, if you believe the anecdotal evidence, exist and possess these kind of strange abilities. So if you take yourself outside of Newtonian physics for a moment and allow yourself to believe that there is a quantum realm or a quantum physics that would explain some of these things, it makes perfect sense. So I've done a lot of defending Ron recently about that, because people say, oh, ask him, one of the questions I got from the Coalition for Critical Thinking and Big Research Group on Facebook was, oh, ask him where he got his degree in quantum physics. Well, he doesn't have a degree in quantum physics, nor has he ever claimed to have one. He's simply saying, look, guys, there's some weird shit going on. Maybe it could be possibly explained if you take a look at Newtonian physics. That's all he's ever said. So there's that. But there's other things that have gone on with me recently. Some of my personal experiences have definitely changed my paradigm just in the last 12 months. I had experiences.
I can go along with that. 100%.
I had experiences where I finally got to see these creatures last summer. And some of those experiences during those encounters were outside the realm of Newtonian physics. Let's just say that. To me, in my mind, I can't explain what I experienced any other way than it being some sort of a paranormal or supernatural ability that would cause what I saw. That's all I'm going to say as far as that goes.
Yeah.
But there's other things that have changed my mind. I know that people are probably, if you listen to my show for any length of time, you know that I'm a very nuts and bolts kind of guy.
You are
16 years in law enforcement. I have to see the evidence. I do not like just subjective, just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. I want to see the evidence.
Right.
So when people hear me talk about things like Newtonian physics and glowing eyes versus eye shine, and then you hear me talk about things like telepathy, how many times have you had conversations with people either on a podcast, seen a podcast, heard a podcast, or talked to somebody at a conference or a festival that says, I had mind speak with a Bigfoot. Mm-hmm. This thing spoke in my mind. I heard this thing tell me, you need to leave, or whatever the case may be. Insert the sentence, right? So many times I've documented that. And I always scoffed at it because I thought it was BS. I really did. I really thought it was BS that people were having this experience. I thought, okay, you're batshit crazy or you're making this up. There's no in between.
Yeah.
Oh my, yeah.
I tell you, I had an interview, I guess it was probably a month or so ago. I interviewed somebody and I don't remember who it was, frankly. It might have been Christopher Noel. If I'm not mistaken, it might have been Chris, but I can't say that for certain. But I had a conversation with somebody and we were talking about mind speaking. This was after the interview. We were just BSing, having a conversation after we'd finished the interview. He said to me, you need to listen to the Telepathy Tapes podcast. It has nothing to do with Bigfoot, although Bigfoot is mentioned, Sasquatch is mentioned in the very first episode. Doesn't have anything to do with the subject, but I thought it was very interesting that happened. But if you listen to the Telepathy Tapes podcast, you'll understand that this is a possibility. So I was like, okay, I took the notes. And so I'm on my way, fast forward almost a year, I guess, after this interview, maybe at least 6 months or so. I'm on my way to Ron Moorhead's house, and I'm like, I'm going to go have a conversation. I know Ron's going to go off the rails. Ron always goes down the rabbit hole with quantum physics and starts talking about these interesting theories of his about Bigfoot. Let me just listen to this Telepathy Tapes podcast. So I go down the rabbit hole. It's a 10-part series. I listen to it. I binged it for 4.5 hours on the way to Ron's house. And I had some time at the beach house the night before, so I listened to another episode. The next day, I finished it. In a nutshell, it has nothing to do with Bigfoot outside of one of the people that were a part of the podcast was 6'8" and a little over 300 pounds. And they made the reference to him looking like a Sasquatch or being like a Bigfoot in the first episode, which I thought was really cool. Unfortunately, he ends up passing away, so it's kind of sad. There's a whole thing, right? I did a lot of crying listening to this podcast. I'm not going to lie. But in a nutshell, it's basically this documentarian. Her name is Kai Dickinson. She hosts this podcast. She does these interviews. She hooked up with a PhD. It's Diane Hennessy, who is a PhD. She's a scientist. She's dealing with nonverbal and minimally verbal autistic children and young adults.
Cool.
And they're looking into the spelling for communication or spelling to communicate phenomenon, where they use boards where they'll point to letters and spell things, or they'll have computer programs or iPads that allow them to speak and respond to questions and or just initiate a conversation. It seems to me to be pretty straightforward, but it's actually a kind of a controversial thing in the autism community. There's some other things that have been sort of disavowed that were similar to that. But so this podcast is essentially about that. So you're like, why are you rambling, Brian? And what does this have to do with Bigfoot, right? It all comes back to Bigfoot. So during this process, what Dr. Hennessy was discovering and interviewing these families and trying to help them with their nonverbal or minimally verbal autistic kids, who, by the way, if you're familiar with this, most clinicians and doctors tell the parents that your kid's not there. You're basically looking at a shell. There's not a whole lot going on there. There's not a whole lot to it. They can't communicate. So, they kind of write them off. Well, the spelling to communicate has completely changed that in the world of autism.
Yep.
But what Dr. Hennessy found in some of these tests that she was doing with these kids was they were having a telepathic connection with typically a parent, most often their mother, but this also extended to teachers and other clinicians, i.e. speech therapists and other people that they were working with in the realm of their world.
Brian, let me say something on that right now, because I have a grandson that way. And I agree with this because he's that way with his sister. And it's totally weird to watch him do that. And she knows exactly what he wants, what he's thinking, talking about, or mind speak. So, yes.
Yeah. So
I saw proof.
So Dr. Hennessy started setting up these, I would call them, although not exactly scientifically rigorous tests in the beginning. Okay, I'll admit that. But here's a scenario. I'll just give you one example and let you think about this. There was one kid named Akil. His mother and he had this connection, right? They put Akil, he was in another room. They had a couple of film crew there. He wasn't real keen on them being there. So he goes into another room, into a closet, under a blanket, and he's got his device that allows him to speak through texting or talking into this device. He types into this device. It says what he's saying. They take the mother into another room. They come up with this on the fly. Kai, the host of this podcast, says, I'm going to pull out my iPhone and I'm going to type in these numbers. I'm going to multiply this number times this number. And it comes out to be 44,126,388. They show the calculator to Akil's mother, who's in the room with 5 cameras on her and him. They show her the number, 44,126,388. They say, Akil, Please let us know what your mother's looking at. Akil types into his 44,126,388.
That's amazing.
This happens over multiple children, hundreds of times, with a 99 to 100% correct rate every single time. So they're not. Wow. This is more than chances. You can say, what am I thinking right now? I'm gonna choose a number from 1 to 10. Right? You can flip a coin and say, okay, 5. Well, no, it was 4. Sorry, you're off. But you had a chance, right? There is no way. My point is, there is no way that these kids, over the course of these multiple experiments, that get tighter and tighter as far as the controls are concerned, because she wants this peer reviewed eventually. So they continue to tighten those scientific controls. They can't do a double blind study, because how do you double blind somebody who's trying to prove that they're telepathic? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So there's you'll hear people say, well, it's not a double blind study. Like when you have the doctor that doesn't know whether you get the placebo or the actual medicine, and then all those things. It's not quite like that, but I'm going to tell you, I walked away from this, bottom line, after 10 episodes, and I think there's 3 bonus episodes going. Telepathy is absolutely real with these children and the people, and sometimes the clinicians and teachers that have two-way conversations with these kids telepathically. There's no way that could happen unless it's real. So, of course, my mind brings everything back to Bigfoot. So I said, am I wrong about all these people that have claimed to have had a telepathic connection with Bigfoot? Because it's not just kids and autism. There's other studies. Dr. Rupert Sheldrake has done multiple studies with tons of different animals, including birds. An African gray parrot, which we was in one of his studies, and dogs. Dogs know when their owners are coming home. There's so many different things that go into this. So if dogs can do it, if horses can do it, if parrots can do it, and if people and their children can do it, why couldn't it be real with Bigfoot? So there's a lot of people that are probably listening to my show after it actually aired today. I did a show about this where I go into detail about some of my thoughts on this. They're probably the collective eye roll can be heard around the world, but ultimately I think we need to be open to having some of these conversations, because I tell you, we've been doing the same thing for 60 years and we're no closer to any answers, in my opinion, about what these creatures are, what they're capable of, the whole 9 yards. So until we start opening our minds and being able to get into some of those deeper conversations about the possibilities here. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, after a conversation with Ron and listening to the telepathy tapes, I have slid down the rabbit hole of woo and high strangeness, and I feel like I'm drowning in the creek at this point, but I'm still grounded in reality. I do think these things are flesh and blood creatures. I'm not buying into by any stretch of the imagination.
Do you think they could be both?
I think they could be physical creatures with other abilities. If you looked at an octopus, you say that an octopus could change color and change shape and become something else. Could a cuttlefish do what it does? Initially, I would probably say no, but it's a real live creature that has these other abilities.
Right.
Is that what we're looking at with Sasquatch? I don't know.
But I have over the last, I'm going to say 6 to 8 months, people will make some nasty comment about Ron. Now, I like Ron. Ron is a very nice man, and I could sit and talk to him for hours. I tell people, I don't know how hard it is for someone to believe what Ron is talking about. And one of the first things I say is, do you believe in ghosts? And they go, well, yeah. And I'm like, well, then how can you believe that a ghost just appears and disappears at will at different places at different times, can touch you, not touch you, can just pass by you like a puff of air, but you can't believe that anything that Ron has to say, like, because you don't understand how spirits do what they do, but you believe it. So how hard is it for you to jump onto the Ron train even if to just explore the subject, because people won't even explore the subject because it's too out there. And I'm like,
one of the things that Ron said during the interview that aired just last week on the show was, we don't know how our cell phones work,
right.
but they do. You send these words through you type it into your cell phone, and somebody 4,500 miles away can get it in a matter of seconds.
Yes.
We know the technology works. We know that it's there. We get it every single day. We pick up the phone and we call and talk to people hundreds or thousands of miles away from us over these little things that we hold in our pockets. Do we have to understand how that works for it to work? Absolutely not, because I don't know how it works. Most people don't get into how it works, but we know it works. So it's almost the same thing when you're talking about these kind of abilities, because the other part of that, I say this, I truly do, as a podcaster, it's important to me to support things that I believe in and support shows.
Yes.
If you are into this at all, listen to the Telepathy Tapes podcast. Just give it a listen for the first episode. If you're not hooked after the first episode, you're probably not into this. But I guarantee you, if you listen to this in its entirety, you'll understand this, because there's the other thing that came out during this. The young man that I was talking about earlier, he was 6'8", a little over 300 pounds. His name was John Paul. He lived in Atlanta, very close to the area where I used to live and where I used to police. So it's kind of like that. I had that feeling, that connection to him already. John Paul ends up passing away during the course of them recording all of the episodes of this podcast. But what came out during this was, not only were these kids having these connections with their parents, in some cases, their clinicians, their teachers, but they have a place where they call the Heal, where these kids go in their minds and telepathically communicate with other children around the world.
Oh my gosh.
And they call it the Heal. They go there similarly, typically it's similar times each day. During the podcast, you'll hear John Paul's mother and them trying to interview him, and John Paul makes an exit. He goes upstairs, he covers his head with a pillow, and he's going, and his mom says, "You're not going to be able to talk to him. He's going to the Heal to talk to his friends." And these kids have talked about collectively meeting each other. Now, some of these kids, they're nonverbal, so they don't talk the way that you and I are communicating right now. The only way they're able to talk is through this spelling to communicate. But when they question them after John Paul passed away, many of these parents went to tell their children, "Hey, your friend John Paul has passed away." And they say, "I know. He told us that on the Heal. He told us he was leaving this world." How would these kids know that? They're nonverbal. They're not on the phone. They're not texting friends. There's no way there's no scientific way this can be explained away other than the fact that they're communicating with each other telepathically. So it really made me think. And again, and I'm not saying that people have asked me this question since I put that episode out. I've literally been answering questions today saying, do you believe now that everybody who claims to have a telepathic connection with a Bigfoot is telling the truth? Absolutely not. I don't believe that at all. But I do believe that we need to take a closer look, and at least me, as a person who does this for a living and interviews people, I need to take those a little bit more seriously and maybe ask a few follow-up questions, because I do think there is a there that we need to all look a little closer at.
Yeah.
So,
what type of follow-up questions would you ask them?
Well, I think there's a ton of follow-up questions you can ask people. Do they have that connection with other people? How many times? I've never asked anybody that question. If you're telepathically connected with a Bigfoot, are you telepathically connected with your mother? Are you telepathically connected with anybody else? Because that would be a telltale sign, in my opinion.
Yeah. If
you possess this ability of, and I firmly believe that on some level, at least I have come to understand, I can say firmly, I believe on some level, we all have this ability. I think it's just something that, particularly with these autistic children and young adults, I think there's something in their brain that allows them to access this ability more freely than we do, because they have less that encumbers their thought process. Right? if we are all unburdened with all of the things that they don't think about or consider, what would be possible for us? So I think if nothing else, that follow-up question would be, well, that's interesting that you think you've had a telepathic connection with a Bigfoot. Have you had that with anybody else, like another person? And just seeing what that answer is, because that happened to me when I was up. I went on an expedition with Todd Standing in October 2023. And that's his thing. He claims to be able to telepathically communicate with Bigfoot. And Ash, his girlfriend / research partner, says the same thing. I didn't think to ask, hey, are you able to communicate with each other telepathically?
Right.
Because that would be a very telling question to ask a person in real time, wouldn't it? If the answer was, well, no, well, then why is it that you're just telepathically communicating with a Bigfoot,
right,
and not your partner? Right. So those kind of things are the kind of questions that I think deserve a little more scrutiny, a little bit more attention, and see what the answer is.
I gotta say, I too, when somebody says to me, "Oh, Bigfoot talks to me telepathically," I listen. I'm already in my mind going, "This person's crazy." Like, I'm gonna listen to their story. I'm gonna put it in a file somewhere, and it's not gonna go anywhere past that because that's crazy. Because I have not experienced it myself. However, in October, I went on a research trip to the Allegheny National Forest, and I have never experienced anything like this before, and I haven't since. And I'll tell you right now, I cannot telepathically communicate with anyone. But in the middle of the night at like 3:00 in the morning, something screamed. It sounded like it was right next to my face, and I'm in the back of my truck sleeping. Something yelled, "Hey," at me, very loud. I sat straight up and was like looking around, and nobody was there. But something screamed, "Hey," very loudly in my ear. It sounded like they were laying right next to me in my car. That's how loud it was. And I sat straight up because I was like, what the hell? Like, who's out here? First of all, we have no cell phone service where we camp. Like, nobody knows where we are. I can't even drop a pin so that I can find it again. You know what I mean? So it's like, I was pretty freaked out. Like, I was able to go back to sleep, but in the morning when I woke up, Paul and I were going for breakfast, and I had to say to him, "Dude, something happened this morning, and I don't know how to explain it because it's never happened before, and I don't know what the hell that was." And I'm not saying it was Bigfoot. I'm not saying it's anything. I'm saying something yelled at me at 3:00 in the morning, and I didn't see anything, and I don't know what the hell that was. And I've chalked it up to that, like this weird experience that I can't explain. But I've had a lot of weird experiences that I can't explain. Like, I've seen eyeshine staring in my bedroom window at me that had no body. I got a photograph of that. Like, that's not possible. What was that? Like, just crazy, wild things. And which is why, I would love to say they're flesh and blood creatures. I don't know. Are they? Because I often say, I think they have abilities that we can't understand, that we don't have the minds big enough to wrap our heads around. You know what I mean? I don't know. Right. Like, is Ron on point? Because he could very well be on point on this whole thing.
Yeah.
The past year, when I do my talks at different places, I bring up the paranormal Bigfoot. And I tell them, I was flesh and blood. What I saw, and it was only 15 feet away from me, I believe was flesh and blood. Did it go down over the hill and jump through a portal? I didn't see it, so I can't say it did. Did it say, "Beam me up, Scotty"? I didn't see it. So here's the thing. I believe they're flesh and blood, but I believe they got other abilities too. Like the infrasound. I don't know what your theory is on that, but I know I got hit with infrasound twice being out in the woods. The one time I wasn't even looking for Bigfoot. But the thing is, and I tell everyone, you got to keep an open mind. You can't just say, "Oh, they're flesh and blood," and that's it. oh, they jump through portals and that's it. You got to have an open mind, or you're never going to understand what they are, or help other ones help you figure it out. But this past year, it really opened up my mind more to their abilities that they possibly have.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I've had Christopher Noel on the show, and I laughed at his Sasquatch savant theory.
Right.
When he wrote the book and it came out, I laughed at him because I was like, how do you even justify this? But the more you get into it and the more you compare some of the things that are described in some of these anecdotal experiences, it matches up with autistic savantism. So was he on to something way earlier than the rest of us? I think there's a possibility. And again, I'm okay with being wrong. I say this all the time. I am perfectly fine with being wrong. I just want to get the answer right. That's all that matters to me. I want the answer to be correct at the end of the day. And if Chris Noel is right, I am perfectly okay with that. Just show me the evidence that points that direction. Right. And I'll be honest, if you listen to, again, the anecdotal experiences of people, and I've said it so many times on the show, people get so pissed off because I say the same things over and over again, but it's to put the point across. I've interviewed over 1,000 people or more at this point, and there's so many accounts where people have had these kind of experiences. Les Stroud comes to mind, Survivor Man Les Stroud. I've had him on the show twice. He's talked about it both times, having these mind speak or these telepathic connections with Bigfoot. Les is a friend of mine. He's somebody that I respect greatly. Gwen, you and I are going out in the woods with him later this year, and I am wanting to pin him down around the campfire and really dig into some of these conversations about some of those weirder experiences, because I think he truly experienced what he said he did. So if you listen to the evidence, if you listen to the people and take everything with a grain of salt, obviously do your research. I'm not saying fall for everything hook, line, and sinker, but if you listen to people, they tell you the truth. Because here's what came out of this for me with the telepathic stuff. I said, I want to know, when was this first documented? There's a genesis for everything, right? At some point in time in the history of the world, there was the first Bigfoot encounter experience. Somebody told somebody else, whether it was tapping it into a stone or drawing it on the ground. I don't know how far back this goes, but there was a genesis for the first Bigfoot experience. Somebody said, I had an experience with the Bigfoot. I saw this thing. When was the first account that somebody said, not only did I have this experience with this thing, but it talked to me in my brain?
Yes.
It was a mind speak telepathic connection. And just talking about this over the last week or so, I've had people reach out to me and say, I think it was one of the Becks. I can't remember exactly who it was. I want to say Beck from the Ape Canyon experience back in 24. He wrote a book. Actually, his son, I think, wrote the book for him after this, some years after the experience. He gets into a lot of what would be considered to be woo and high strangeness experiences that went along with this quote unquote attack at the Ape Canyon incident experience near Mount St. Helens. And one of those experiences was them being able to hear things in their mind that these creatures were sharing with them.
Right.
So even if let's say that was the genesis, 1924, during the Ape Canyon attack, was the first time mind speak was ever mentioned.
Right.
Why would anybody say, oh, I had this experience with this 8-foot tall, hairy ape in North America. And oh, by the way, if that's not weird enough, guess what it did? It talked to me in my brain. Who would say that if there's not a grain of truth? If you stay in anything long enough, particularly law enforcement, you know that the truth always lies somewhere in the middle.
Yes.
There's the extremes, one way or the other, left or right, whatever the case may be. There's a truth there somewhere.
Yes.
So that's where I'm on the hunt for at this point. I want to know where the truth is, because somebody had to start talking about this, and it's continued on through all of these anecdotal experiences. I've documented, 50 at this point. Say 50 out of almost 600 episodes that have made it onto the show at this point. Why would those people say I had a mind speak telepathic connection with a Bigfoot if it weren't true?
Right.
Would they say that? Absolutely. People say things that aren't true all the time. Doesn't make sense to me, but they do. People confess to murders that they don't commit. That's weird to me, but it happens. But why would somebody say I had a Bigfoot talk to me in my brain if there wasn't some sort of grain of truth there to begin with? So that's the thread that I'm sort of picking away at this point.
Right.
To look further into it and see if there's a there.
Well, I appreciate you doing that because like I said, as soon as somebody says to me, Bigfoot mind speaks me, I shut right down. I'm like, and I don't know that I can do that anymore. Like, I've got to revisit some of those conversations. Yep. But the thing I struggle with is, how do I know that what I'm hearing is not something my own brain is producing? How can I trust myself to know that, okay, that comment came from somebody else versus generated inside my own brain?
And that's what I've always argued. That has been my go-to argument. I've told stories multiple times on many podcasts as a guest. I've told it on my show about being a cop and having those experiences where something in my brain said, don't walk to that side of the car. Don't do it. And I'd done it 1,000 times. And the one time I listened to that, I went to the opposite side of the car and the dude was holding a 45 and he was going to shoot me in the face. Had I not listened to that part of my brain that said, don't do that, Brian, I wouldn't be here having this conversation with you. Right. So there is that sixth sense. Maybe it's a seventh or eighth sense. I don't know. I don't know what number it is, but we all have that. We know when something says, maybe take a different route from home. And then you get home and you see there was an 8-car pileup where four people died on your way home. That happens to everybody. There's something to that. But I think it goes a little bit farther than that, in that there's a whole nother layer that maybe we're just not getting to, that I think we need to pay attention to.
I agree.
But people close their minds off to that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the problem. Instead of keeping an open mind. And I'm like with Gwen and like you were before. A couple years ago, it's like, these people are Looney Tunes. Mm-hmm. But that was a couple years ago. And I'm slowly believing in their stuff there. There is something there.
And trust me, Bill, there are plenty of Looney Tunes out there. In Bigfoot, in everything.
You ain't joking.
Anything you talk about. But here's the thing I've prided myself on that. I've had a couple of voicemails as recently as yesterday, and I got one today before we hopped on here. People saying, I appreciate your approach to this because you're willing to change your mind. And I actually put that in the episode that I posted today. It was a quote. I don't remember the gentleman who said it, but basically, as new facts come in, I change my mind.
Exactly.
Yes.
And if you don't do that, then you probably shouldn't be looking into this or anything else, because if you refuse to change your paradigm or you refuse to change your stance on something when a fact is slapping you in the face, then I think you're doing yourself and the subject, whatever the subject is, I think you're doing yourself a disservice, because if I say, no, dude, this is the fact, I can present this as a fact, and you go, I don't care, that doesn't fit my paradigm, I don't want to hear it.
You're doing your research injustice.
Yeah. And I'm not going to have too many conversations with you at that point, because you have clearly made up your mind and you're not going to change your mind. And look, I'm not in this game to change anybody's mind. Right. I'm in this for myself and to seek those answers for myself, but I'm going to do it in a way where I feel like I've got all of the information. I had several people on recently. Tom Powell comes to mind. Tom Powell is somebody who's really into the woo, or he's into the high strangeness part of this. And we have friends in common, like Cliff Barrickman, completely the opposite. And I've always aligned more with Cliff's approach to this. But Tom told me, he's like, look, you do what you do, I'll do what I do. Let's have a beer and let's discuss the results and share the data and make a decision based on all of the information.
Right.
And I think that is the best advice anybody can take. If you don't take anything away from this interview tonight, take that away. Do your thing, but be open-minded to what other people are doing and be willing to come together and have those conversations and put all the information at the same time in the same place and make an informed decision about what you believe these things are, what you believe people's experiences are. And that's what's going to move the research down the field and further, in my opinion.
And I say
you're saying the same thing I've always been saying for the last year and a half. You know, you got the open mind. You got to have it. And of course, you got the three factions in the Bigfoot world: the flesh and blood, the interdimensional, the alien, and a lot of them you can't sway them one way or the other. You know, even when you throw some facts at them. And I'm sorry, you know, I still think they're flesh and blood, but I think they can be interdimensional too. And
I often say that when I see one come out of a portal or I see one beam down out of a spaceship, I'll get in board that camp. But until then, you got to have an open mind. And I think if you go into the woods already set on it's this or it's that, you're going to discard evidence that because it doesn't fit your narrative. And that's not what science is about. Like, if you really want to look at this in a scientific way, you have to be open-minded to any and all possibilities. And that piece of evidence may not make sense to you right now, but I always do the, I can't explain it. Here it is. It's in this column. I found this. I don't know what it is or why it's here or how it got here, but it's here. And I'm going to mark that down because 5 years from now, I might be in Alaska and come across the same thing. And I can go, whoa, wait a minute. You know, I had that happen years ago at another location. But if you throw everything out that doesn't fit your narrative, then where are you going? You're not going anywhere. You're not ever going to come to an answer. You're never going to come to a conclusion. And to me, that's a waste of science.
And I'll be honest, that's come up several times with me. I got some heat and some hot water. I don't know, it's probably 6, 7, 8 months ago. Wayne and I were talking over on that Bigfoot podcast about some of my evidence. I've cast footprints here on my property, multiple sets of footprints. I cast a set of footprints on my neighbor's property about a mile away. And the first thing that people did when I was able to replicate those, it's a process to build these mother molds and to get a cast out of these things. And I was so proud because I'd talked to Cliff on the phone. I was on the phone with Michael Freeman, who are both very prolific in casting and recreating these molds. And they helped me through this process. And I was so elated when I was able to make replications of my cast that I cast on my property. And the first thing people said when I put those photos out was, well, has it been verified by Cliff Bergman or Jeff Meldrum?
Oh, geez.
And I got into hot water because, you know, if you've interacted with me on social media, I don't hold my tongue. Right. I will defend myself to the hilt. I have no qualms tangling it up with people. Right, wrong, or indifferent. That's just who I am. And I was like, what do you mean verified? How do you verify a footprint from a cryptid that is not proven to exist by science? Absolutely. You have other footprints that you can examine and determine whether or not you think these things are real, right? That's what Jeff Meldrum does. Jeff's a friend of mine. I don't take anything away from Jeff at all. I think he is phenomenal. I think he is great at what he does. He is an expert on human and bipedal locomotion. He is a professor of anthropology. He's been wrong about footprints when it comes to Bigfoot. And so is Cliff. And I love Cliff to death. He is a dear friend of mine. He wrote the foreword to my first book. But Cliff has been wrong. He was fooled by several incidents in the past,
right,
where he believed these footprints were quote unquote real and they turned out to be hoaxed. So my only point was there is no verification process for a footprint that comes from a cryptid animal that's not proven to be real by science. Everything is subjective here. So let's be real about what we're talking about. Do I want Cliff to look at these? Absolutely. Cliff was the first person that I sent the first cast that came out of my mother mold that were sent to Cliff for him to take a look at. I know he scanned those. I know he sent 3D scans to Jeff Meldrum, who has yet to respond to me to ask Any questions? What
Yeah.
he thinks about them? There's some reasons for that are going on. We're not even going to get into that are outside of the realm of this. So I kind of know what's happening there. But my point was, is there gatekeepers as far as evidence is concerned with Bigfoot? And I believe that's what's happening here.
Yeah.
And when I asked Ron specifically, going back to the Sierra Sounds, I asked him specifically about Krantz and Meldrum's opinion on the footprints that came from there. And Ron said very much what I said. Look, they only have what they believe to be real. They believe the Patterson footage is real. They believe that those tracks that were cast after this creature allegedly walked across the sandbar, so they think those are real. They compare yours, being mine, to those. If there's differences, they throw it out. It's not real. Same thing with Ron. If they compare tracks that were found at the Sierra camp to Patty's footprints, or some of these others that are considered to be real, and frankly, some of the Freeman stuff is considered to be real, which is a controversial subject amongst a lot of people. But it's their paradigm. It goes back to that materialistic scientific rigor that we're talking about in science. If it doesn't fit within that parameter or that paradigm, they're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So Ron was like, frankly, I never gave Meldrum or Krantz any of our footprints to even examine, because I don't need them to prove that it was real, because I know what we experienced. So I thought that was a very telling answer from Ron.
Absolutely.
And Ron, he makes no qualms about it. He's like, look, I'm in my 80s. I don't really give a shit what you think at this point.
Right.
I'm just going to put it out there the way that it is. You can accept it or not, but I'm telling you what happened and the truth. And that's really all you can expect. And that's the same thing I've done with my evidence. Look, I have no qualms about it. You can examine anything I've ever put out there and tell me what your opinion is, and we can have a conversation about it. But until you have a type specimen to compare footprint to footprint, and even that may differ, right? What if we get a type specimen tomorrow that doesn't match up with Patty's footprints? Are we going to throw Patty and the Patterson-Gimlin film and those prints out with the bathwater based on a type specimen tomorrow? Probably not. Things differ. We differ as humans. Animals differ. It is what it is. So I feel like I'm going down a rabbit hole on a rant. So I'm going to take a drink of my drink and let you guys talk amongst yourselves.
Well, we're going to change gears because I want to talk about some other things that you've got going on. One is this right here, your book.
Oh,
which I have not gotten to read yet. I'm going to be flat out honest. I won't lie to you. Yeah, I know. I got sucked up in a different book because I don't know. I don't believe in coincidence. And when two people call you out of nowhere that you don't normally talk to and say, you've got to read this book, I'm like, okay, I guess I need to read this book. It's the universe's way of telling me, bitch, read the book. So I'm almost done with that one. So when I get done with that one, yours is next. But this is kind of different. It's not a research book. It's not what evidence you found or what theories you have. This is different. So talk to us about that.
It's very different. If you guys have checked out Sasquatch Unleashed, The Truth Behind the Legend, it is a very nuts and bolts kind of book. It is a very scientific approach to the subject. I do talk about Occam's razor. I talk about the scientific method. I talk about where are the bodies. I talk about the fossilization process, which is really fascinating for a lot of people, but it's like paint drying for other people. So I get it. Not everybody are into those types of books, but I felt it was very important for me because I wanted to sort of go on the record about what I felt about those things. I talk a lot about Sasquatch in pop culture, which I think is huge. I think pop culture and documentaries and shows and podcasts like yours and mine influence greatly what happens in the Bigfoot community. So I wanted to talk a lot about that. I've never read fiction. I'm not a big fiction reader. I've read the Harry Potter series. I've talked about it before, the Twilight vampire series. I should be ashamed to admit that I've read those books and watched the movies, but I did because I enjoyed them.
I watched the movies.
But outside of that, I am not a big fiction reader. I don't like fiction. I like historical biographies. I like history. I like the nuts and bolts scientific kind of books. But this story was gnawing at me because there are a lot of people out there who love stories. They love fictionalized Bigfoot things. probably the exception, not the rule, I guess. But I had this story brewing in my mind for months and months and months. And I said, I talked to Danny about it plenty of times. I was like, I have this story in my brain about this baby Sasquatch that's born into the world. And we get to see everything that Sasquatch experiences from the time it's born to the time it passes away, however long that may be, from the Sasquatch's perspective. Because I don't think we've ever had anything like that I'm aware of that's been out there, right? Everything's pretty much from the human perspective dealing with Sasquatch, and most of those things are scary. The Sasquatch is this big, hairy beast that's breaking into the cabin and trying to kill everybody and those kind of stories. This, to me, was very different. And KODA'S story was born. So, very first chapter of the book, you have the birth of KODA. And there's a very sad moment in the very first chapter. I was shocked because even before the book came out in print, I was putting out some of the chapters that I was narrating over on Sasquatch Odyssey for people to hear the story, because I wanted to see if people would connect with the characters the way that I did. And I'm going to tell you something. When I narrated the first chapter of the book that I wrote, I cried during the narration because it was such a sad moment in the book. And I was like, holy shit, if I'm connected to the characters, if I get a 10% of that from the audience that reads this eventually, I've done something cool here. Absolutely. And sure enough, as soon as I put the first chapter out on Sasquatch Odyssey that I narrated, I was getting voicemails and emails from grown men saying, damn you, dude. You had me crying in the first chapter of the book. And that was not my intention to make anybody do that. It was just one of those things that was, to me, it made sense to be a part of the story.
Yes. Yeah.
But once they got past that, they were connected with these characters. And it's a real odyssey. It really is an odyssey. The development of, I set out to try to do about a year per chapter. It didn't work out that way because Danny got involved, and I went from like 12 chapters of the book to like 65 chapters of the book. So it's got about 64 chapters. That was Danny's doing, but I broke it up into smaller bits for people to digest easier, I guess. Right. But there's all kinds of things. There's an entire world that's built around these. It's not just KODA and his parents. There are other tribes and clans of these Bigfoot that they meet with each other. There's an antagonist with a rogue Sasquatch that they have to deal with. Obviously, I had to figure out a way to weave in the human connection because there is this other antagonist of the humans that are encroaching on their clans and the things that happen when they clash. So there's all of these stories that are built in, and it's just the beginning. Honestly, it's volume 1 because there's probably going to be, I don't know, 4 or 5 other volumes, maybe 6. I don't know. I don't know how long KODA's going to live. I don't know what his world's going to look like, but I thought it was a cool story. And when I started writing it, it just got better and better. And I knew I was onto something. And when I was so invested in the characters by the end of the book, again, I thought if I can just get 10% of the people that read the book to be as invested in these characters as I was, I think it's a thing. So it is fiction. It's a completely fictionalized story, but there are things that I have learned from my research, all of the interviews that I've done, all of the descriptions and the things that people have described to me. There are parts of that are weaved into the story, so it makes it a little more believable, I think. So I'm a little biased. I think it's a kick-ass book. I think it's awesome. For me to say that, and I don't read fiction, I think there's something to be said about that. But yeah, I've got rave reviews. Everybody who has read the book has said, they read it in a couple of days. They couldn't turn it down. They couldn't put it down. It was a page turner.
Those are the type of books I like. You can't put them down. You got to keep reading.
Yeah, when you hear
Tell
that,
where they can get it at. So, Brian.
Yeah, the easiest place, if you want an autographed copy, you head over to paranormalworldproductions.com, which is our website. There's a store button right there at the top of the page. You can go over and order the book directly from us, and I'll send those out. I think Danny sends them out a couple of times a week, depending on when the orders come in. You can get an autographed copy, but you can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it on Barnes & Noble. And you can go directly to Hanger One Publishing, hangar1publishing.com. They are the ones who publish the book. There's tons of Bigfoot there that you can pick up while you're at Hanger One. So you can get it directly from them as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, you have another another podcast in the works. Your missing national forest. You're going to do a series on that?
Yeah, I started this. Yeah, it's another thing that I've talked about so many times I've done some of the cases on the True Crime podcast. Wayne and I have talked about some of these missing persons cases on that Bigfoot podcast. But yeah, I do the Backwoods Bigfoot Stories podcast. It's all about stories that people submit. I pull those stories from databases, the BFRO, other databases that I have access to pull those stories from, and I narrate them. Sometimes they have to be rewritten because they're not written so great, let's say.
Right.
I will rework the story so the narrative flows a little bit better. People have asked me, do you write these stories? If you're talking about rewriting them, yes, I rewrite just about every story and email that comes into me because they don't always flow the way they should. But
right.
I got into wanting to do a series on some of these strange missing person cases, the disappearances. Obviously, the missing 411 comes to mind. Everybody says, well, it's been covered. But there are other angles to these that everybody doesn't look into. So I kind of take a different approach, and I try to I approach it more like a true crime podcast episode where I give the facts about the case. And the first episode dropped, I think, today, maybe yesterday. I don't know. It's hard to keep up when you have so many podcasts, but
it is.
I put the first episode with that within the last few days, and it's been amazing response. I actually reposted it over on Sasquatch Odyssey, and I've had people reach out saying this is phenomenal because they are into those kind of cases. But I try to take more of a criminal take on it. I try to look more at the facts, and I was very honest in the very beginning of that first episode. Look, I'm not saying Bigfoot is responsible for any of this. I'm not saying that any cryptid is involved in this. I'm just going to give you the facts of the case, and like everything I present on the show, I want you to make up your own mind about it, because I think that's a fine line to walk. I mean, these are human beings we're talking about. Their families involved.
Yes.
And you can't go out there and say Bigfoot did it. Now, trust me, there are plenty of people on Facebook that say that.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, he was taken by Bigfoot, guaranteed. Well, you don't know that, right?
Right.
We wouldn't be talking about it if it weren't a mystery. So I never talk in definitives. I just present the evidence as it is, and you as a listener can say that makes sense. I think this person killed her, or something weird could have happened here, because there are some very weird coincidences or nuances or elements to each one of these cases. Not in all cases, but by and large, a lot of the cases that I plan on covering in the series, there are some very interesting, let's say, coincidences that seem to run as a common thread amongst all of these cases. So that's what you can expect. And some of them, some of them have been covered in maybe some of the 411 stuff. Some of other have been covered in other places. Maybe you'll hear a case you've never heard before. Who knows? But by and large, they're all centered in and around national parks or national forests, or just wilderness areas, hiking trails in general. They're in the wilderness, right? So that's kind of what you can expect.
Which is awesome. I can't wait, because I love that kind of stuff. Love that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, I don't know how many there are going to be. I mean, there's tons of cases. I just did the first one. I'm planning on doing one a week on every Sunday over on Backwoods Bigfoot Stories. You can get that on YouTube. There's a Backwoods Bigfoot Stories. I think we got about 16,000 subscribers at this point over there. We'd love to have more. So if you guys want to check out Backwoods Bigfoot Stories, go over there and show us some love. There's tons of videos. There's tons of stories. And it's not just about that. That's a brand new series. That first one just aired, but there are a ton of other stories that you're not going to hear anywhere else. A lot of these stories come from people that don't want to come on Sasquatch Odyssey and do a 45-minute video interview with me. They'll just send in the story via email and say, look, this happened to me back in 1975 or whatever, when I was a kid and I was on my farm and this happened or whatever. So there's a lot of that. And most of those stories, like I said, are either emails that are sent in, or I source them from other databases that I have access to. So,
Right. That's awesome. Well, out of respect for your time, because we're almost at an hour and a half, and I know you are a busy man, because you are incredibly hard to get a hold of sometimes.
You're always on the move.
He is. Well, I love you like a brother. I really do. And I love your husband like a brother because I love him too. He's awesome. And I'm going to be seeing you at the end of May when we go over to the UK again. And which we need to get together and plan our flights so that we can arrive at the same time.
And maybe help each other figure out how to ride a train from London to Somerset.
Yeah. So that we have time to talk and chat because I miss that because you're so far away. So thank you for coming on tonight and for talking with us. I loved the entire conversation because I find Ron Moorhead fascinating and I was so jealous that you did that interview and I was like, that's awesome. And the book is going to be awesome as soon as I get into reading it. And I'm sure you'll hear because I'm going to call you and tell you I'm crying in the because I'm a crybaby. That's what we do. And then I can't wait to watch this national park thing because that's fascinating. I've seen all the 411 videos, so I'm very into that kind of thing. And especially since we research in some national forests and stuff, that's always in the back of my mind that I may not come home. Mike says to me, "Can you write me a note that says you went out into the national forest of your own free will and I have nothing to do with you becoming missing?" And I'm like, yeah, I'll write you a note. But thank you for coming on and sharing your experiences and things with us. And I can't wait to see what you do next because you're always doing something.
Can I do one plug before we go?
Absolutely.
Yeah, my first big speaking gig and traveling gig is coming up on April the 5th. I will be down in Ocala at the Great Florida Bigfoot Conference. And I'm excited about this for a number of reasons. Mariah Mayer is going to be there. I think Charlie Raymond's going to be there. Biko Wright is going to be there. Tons of other great people, always great, phenomenal people like RPG is going to be the master of ceremonies.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Tons of great things. Marty and Nikki Gather Up Events do phenomenal stuff. They run the Great Smoky God, I can't talk. Great Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Conference. Thank you. Up in Tennessee, up in Gatlinburg. That's sometime in July. I will be there as well. But I'm definitely enjoying the Ocala conference is at the World Equestrian Center. It's a world-class equestrian park kind of thing. It's a phenomenal setup. So if you haven't got to see that, but I'm particularly excited about this year. I was there last year. I ran the roundtable that they have, that a Skunk Ape roundtable. I ran that for them, but I'm excited about this year because we're going to do two things. I'm going to get to share the details of the experiences that I had out in the Pacific Northwest last year that I've been under NDA for over a year and haven't been able to talk about even on my own show. So I'm going to be able to share those for the first time in person on the stage during my presentation at the Great Florida Bigfoot Conference on April 5th. And we're also going to show some of the footage from the documentary we were filming at the time I had those experiences. My Bigfoot Life is going to be presented there. I don't know how long, how much we're going to show there, but some of that footage while we're on stage during my presentation. So I'm stoked about that. I hope to see everybody there. I'm going to have books and some other stuff. So if you're in the area of Ocala, Florida on April 5th, come out. There's still tickets available. Come out and see me. I'd love to see you guys there and maybe have a conversation, pick up a book, those kind of things.
Definitely have a conversation because Brian is amazing to speak to. So absolutely. And Brian, I have to say, I may or may not know what happened at the end of that documentary. And dude, if you got to go out to Ocala and watch Brian's presentation, that's what I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say about it. You got to get out there and you got to see it. And if you miss it there, you're going to be able to catch the entire documentary at my festival in August because we are going to have a private showing of it on Friday night, which you can get tickets to on centralpabigfoot.com. And then after the showing, Mr. Brian King Sharp is going to sing a song that he wrote and performed for the documentary. He's going to perform it live for us at the festival. And I'm so excited because, and bring tissues because I'm going to freaking be balling because his song is goddamn amazing. And I don't know where he got that voice from, but he should really be on a stage somewhere singing in front of a packed house full 50,000 people.
Been there,
He's
done that.
modest.
Been there, done that. Bought the T-shirt. I'd rather do that.
He's amazing. He's amazing. And I'm not just saying that because he's my brother, but because I love him and he absolutely is amazing. So if you don't catch him in Ocala, catch him in Pennsylvania because it's going to be awesome.
I will be catching you in PA.
Yeah,
I try to make plans to go down to Ocala this year. I just can't do it.
I mean,
I really wanted to.
Unfortunately, Bill's going to be at my festival.
Yes. I'm going to be a pain in her ass.
Yes, all damn day. I'm sure of it. So yes, get out there to see him because he's amazing. And the story he's going to be sharing is pretty freaking amazing. So get out there. Head out there. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Brian. I love you.
Thank y'all.
And I can't wait to see you again in person. So we'll see you soon.
And I'm ordering the books as we get off the air.
Awesome.
So thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. It was great. The conversation was amazing, as always, with Brian. We are going to say goodnight. And in 2 weeks, we are going to have Shane Corson here. So get your questions prepared because he is just as awesome as Brian is. So get ready. Have a great night, everybody.
This has been a